The trailer for Yellowstone 1944 just answered the single most important question every fan of this franchise has been sitting with since the final frames of 1923's devastating Season 2 finale. Will Spencer Dutton survive long enough to meet his son? Will John Dutton II grow up to become the man his father never got to raise him to be? Who is the woman that John Dutton II marries, the grandmother that Kevin Costner's John Dutton III never once named in 5 seasons of Yellowstone? And with the entire Dutton empire balanced on the shoulders of a 21-year-old whose mother died the night he was born, is 1944 the prequel that finally explains why the modern Dutton family is so utterly incapable of letting anyone take that ranch? Every single one of those questions now has an answer, and if this is the kind of Yellowstone content fans want to see, hitting subscribe and the like button means the next breakdown lands on the feed the moment it drops. The single most important image in the Yellowstone 1944 trailer is not the burning field. It is not Spencer Dutton standing on the Montana frontier with the Yellowstone brand glowing at his back. It is the young man's hands. The trailer places a new Dutton heir, a young man in his early 20s, jaw set, eyes carrying the particular kind of grief that only comes from growing up without a mother and being told by everyone around him that the land he inherited is the only thing that matters. And the camera finds his hands. One holds a letter, the other holds a branding iron that is not yet lit. That image is doing the work of an entire season in under 2 seconds, because every fan of Yellowstone who has watched Kevin Costner deliver variations of the same speech across 5 seasons knows exactly what that branding iron means. It is not a ranch tool, it is a covenant. And the moment that iron lights, John Dutton II is no longer just Spencer's son. He becomes the Dutton who holds the line through the most devastating war in human history, and the one whose choices will echo forward into everything fans already know. However, unfortunately, the trailer makes brutally clear that holding that line in 1944 is going to cost this young man things that no amount of land or legacy can ever replace. The hope in the 1944 trailer is enormous, and it is specific. Taylor Sheridan has described the Yellowstone prequel series as time capsules of Montana functioning as a microcosm of the world, and 1944 arrives at the most global, most historically weighted moment in the franchise's entire history. Everything the Duttons built in 1883, every acre claimed and relationship forged on that brutal westward journey, and everything Jacob and Kara Dutton bled for in 1923, their fight against the railroad, the government boarding schools, the bank, the drought, now rests entirely on a generation that did not choose the burden, but cannot put it down. The sweeping landscape shots in the trailer, the familiar Montana plains under a winter sky that has not changed in 60 years of Dutton storytelling, the ranch house standing exactly where it has always stood, carry a weight that neither 1883 nor 1923 could fully access, because for the first time in the franchise, the audience is watching a story they already know the ending of. They already know this ranch survives. They have watched it survive in the modern series, defended by Kevin Costner with the absolute conviction of a man whose father taught him this land was worth any price. They just do not yet know what that price looked like in 1944. And the trailer promises that the answer to that question is a story unlike anything Sheridan has attempted before. However, unfortunately, the trailer also makes brutally clear that survival in wartime does not resemble triumph. It looks like a funeral under stormy skies. It looks like a soldier's farewell on a train platform that every person watching knows he might not return from. It looks like a brand being burned into a generation's skin before anyone on that ranch has had the chance to ask whether they chose this legacy or whether it simply chose them. The most likely explanation for what fans are watching in the 1944 trailer is that John Dutton II is the true center of this story, not Spencer, not any surviving figure from 1923, and that the show's central dramatic tension is the question of what kind of man a Dutton becomes when he has no father to raise him and no mother to soften the weight of what he has inherited. The evidence is clear throughout the trailer. The camera keeps returning to this young man, alone in spaces that are too large for him, on a ranch that requires 20 hands, and is currently held together by three. At a moment in American history when every able-bodied man in Montana, with a sense of duty, is being asked to leave everything behind and report. What the trailer captures in his face is not a hero preparing for glory. It is a person who already understands that whatever choice he makes, the wrong thing is going to survive, and the right thing is going to pay for it. The most logical conclusion is that 1944 will place John Dutton II in an impossible position that every Dutton fan will immediately recognize: the choice between land and duty, between the family obligation to stay and the national obligation to go. Spencer Dutton faced a version of this in 1923, choosing Africa over the ranch before the violence of the world forced him home. John Dutton II faces a version from which there is no clean exit, because the war that calls him is not a personal adventure on another continent. It is the Second World War, and in 1944 it does not ask politely. And if this theory proves correct, the consequences for the Dutton Ranch are enormous. It would mean that the land John Dutton III inherits in the modern series was nearly lost twice, once in the economic devastation of the 1920s, and once in the wartime labor collapse of the 1940s, and that the obsession with never selling, the absolute refusal to yield a single acre, is not a character flaw in Kevin Costner's John Dutton. It is a trauma response passed down across 3 generations of men who were each asked to give too much and give it gladly. The evidence strongly suggests that Spencer Dutton's role in 1944 is not that of a main character, but of something even more emotionally powerful: a witness. Every great Sheridan story has one character who stands at the edge of the action and carries the meaning, the figure through whose aging eyes the full weight becomes legible. In 1944, that figure is Spencer Dutton. Brandon Sklenar told The Hollywood Reporter, with the kind of specificity that does not read like an actor pitching himself, but like an actor who has already been told how the story fits together: give him gout, a little hunch, some salt and pepper, and he is ready. That is not a general expression of enthusiasm. That is a physical description of a man in his late 40s who has survived 2 continents, a war, the death of the woman he loved at the moment she gave him the greatest thing he would ever have, and 2 decades of watching his son grow up in the shadow of a grief that was never fully spoken aloud. Sklenar also told Variety that the role of Spencer has changed who he is as a person, that the character's particular combination of survival instinct and emotional damage left a mark on the actor himself. That kind of statement does not come from someone who has finished with a character. It comes from someone who knows there is more story left to tell. The most logical reading of what Sklenar is describing is Spencer Dutton as the elder statesman of the 1944 story. Still alive, still standing on the Montana frontier he fought his way back to, but no longer the protagonist. The ranch is John Dutton II's now. The war is John Dutton II's to navigate. Spencer's role is to watch his son become the man he could not be there to raise, and that dynamic, the father who arrives too late to parent, but just in time to witness, is the exact kind of emotional engine that made 1923 one of Paramount's biggest original series in history. However, unfortunately, the timeline math is not generous. John Dutton III is born in 1959. This story is set in 1944. The gap is 15 years. What happens to the Dutton Ranch and to the Dutton family in that 15-year window is the question that 1944 has to answer, and the trailer suggests that what happens is anything but quiet. The trailer makes it clear that the wartime threat to the Yellowstone Ranch is not coming from a villain with a name. It is coming from history itself. Reports and industry analysts covering the show have noted that Sheridan appears to be building the antagonist of 1944 as something structural rather than personal: the wartime government land programs that allowed federal reclamation of property, the labor collapse that left ranches across Montana understaffed and vulnerable, the industrial and agricultural shifts of the 1940s that permanently altered the economics of Western ranching. Fans on Reddit have been tracking the historical mechanics of this period closely, and the most chilling observation circulating in prequel fan communities is this: the federal government in the 1940s was the most powerful eminent domain force in American history. The same wartime machinery that defeated Germany and Japan was also quietly acquiring land. That is the enemy in 1944. Not a railroad baron, not a corrupt senator, not a rival ranching family. The United States government itself, and the machinery of a war that rewarded sacrifice from ordinary Americans by taking their land in the same breath. Fans believe that this structural antagonist is not just dramatically compelling, but thematically essential, because it is the origin of every single fight Kevin Costner's John Dutton picks with every politician and developer who knocks on his door in the modern series. The Duttons do not distrust government because they are contrarian. They distrust government because their father taught them, in 1944, exactly what the government does to people who trust it with something they love. While the main conflict in the trailer belongs to John Dutton II and the ranch, there is another storyline quietly building in the background that every fan needs to pay attention to before the first episode drops, and it involves the most important character in the entire Yellowstone franchise, who has never once appeared on screen. The mystery woman who becomes John Dutton III's grandmother is the secondary arc that has been haunting this franchise since the original series began, and fans are only now beginning to understand how completely the 1944 trailer has been constructed around the deliberate withholding of her identity. Alexandra Dutton died hours after giving birth to John Dutton II in the 1923 finale. Julia Schlaepfer's performance in that scene remains one of the most devastating in the entire prequel run. A woman who survived the chaos of 2 continents, dying in Montana stillness, surrounded by people she loved, before she ever got to hold her son. John Dutton II grew up without his mother. He grew up as the son of a man scarred by grief and shaped by survival instinct, in a house where the most important female presence, the matriarch, was a role that had been empty since the moment he drew his first breath. And at some point between 1944 and 1959, when John Dutton III is born, John Dutton II met and married a woman that the franchise has never named. She is the Dutton matriarch that Sheridan has saved for last. The trailer hints at her presence without revealing her face. A shadow in a doorway, a pair of hands setting a dinner table in the background of a shot where the men are arguing in the foreground, which is exactly the kind of deliberate visual grammar Sheridan deploys when the reveal is going to land with full franchise weight. Fans across every Yellowstone platform are treating this as the most anticipated character introduction in the franchise's history. The matriarch who is not Jacob's Kara, not James's Margaret, but the woman who planted whatever seeds eventually grew into Kevin Costner's John Dutton. What makes this development even more significant is the way 1944 sits inside the broader Yellowstone Universe architecture at a moment when the franchise is running multiple timelines simultaneously. Dutton Ranch is currently airing its first season on Paramount+, placing Beth and Rip in South Texas in the present day. Marshall's launched in March 2026 on CBS, following Case Dutton across his own story in a different corner of the same world. The Madison debuted the same month with an entirely separate family that exists outside the Dutton line entirely. The franchise is, right now, as spread across time and geography as it has ever been. And the cumulative effect for fans is a universe that feels large without always feeling connected. However, unfortunately, none of the modern shows can reach back and explain the thing fans most need explained. Why the Dutton Ranch in Montana, the specific one, the one that John Dutton III died defending, matters so much that this entire universe keeps circling back to it across 4 decades and 6 spin-offs. Only 1944 can answer that. Only 1944 can show the generation that held the ranch through the hardest period in American history and handed it forward. Fans believe that this is why 1944 is structurally the most important prequel in the franchise. Not because it has the most dramatic setting, though a wee-why backdrop is inherently cinematic, but because it is the load-bearing prequel. Remove 1944 from the franchise architecture, and the bridge between 1923 and Yellowstone collapses entirely. The Dutton legacy becomes mythology without mechanism. Every reference John Dutton III ever made to his father, every time the history of that ranch came up in the modern series and demanded to be respected rather than explained, has been pointing toward this show and the generation it finally puts on screen. After everything the 1944 trailer has revealed, the return of Spencer Dutton, the emergence of John Dutton II, The wartime structural threat to the ranch, the mystery of the unnamed grandmother, the thematic architecture that connects this story to everything fans already know. The question every single viewer is now asking is the one that has been hanging over this project since it was first announced in November 2023. When does this actually air? The confirmed intelligence from journalist Matt Webb-Midovich, whose reporting on this franchise has proven consistently reliable, is that 1944 is still in active development at Paramount and was targeting a late 2026 premiere window as recently as earlier this year. However, as of the time of this breakdown, filming has not yet commenced, and no official production start date has been announced by Paramount, which means the late 2026 window is now very tight. Production is expected to take place in the Bitterroot Valley in Montana, a location Paramount confirmed as far back as February 2023, which means Sheridan has known exactly where this story lives for over 3 years. The realistic premiere window, factoring in how long it takes to film and post-produce a Sheridan series of this scale, now points more firmly toward early 2027, following the same rough 9-month trajectory from production start to screen that the earlier prequels established. Taylor Sheridan's overall deal with Paramount runs through the end of 2028, after which he transitions to NBC Universal, meaning 1944 sits well within the window where Sheridan can still give it the full weight of his attention before the move. Based on everything the production calendar and the franchise's own track record have confirmed, the wait for 1944 is real. But so is the show. And based on what this trailer has already shown about what is coming, the wait is going to feel longer than any previous entry in the Yellowstone universe. Now, the conversation moves to the fans, and there are 3 specific debates this trailer has ignited that are splitting the Yellowstone community right down the middle. First, should Spencer Dutton be a series lead or a supporting presence in 1944? And does making him a supporting character in his own son's story represent the most emotionally sophisticated move Sheridan has ever made in this franchise, or a missed opportunity that fans will never fully forgive? Second, who is the woman John Dutton II marries between 1944 and 1959, and does the 1944 trailer already contain a glimpse of her that fans are not yet reading correctly? Because Sheridan has never once introduced a character without planting the seed several episodes before the reveal. And third, is 1944 the single most important Yellowstone prequel ever made? The one that finally explains not just the family's history, but the deep psychological architecture of why every Dutton in every timeline would rather die on that land than live anywhere else. Or is that a burden too heavy for any single show to carry? The video on screen covers everything else fans need to know about the complete Yellowstone timeline before 1944 begins production.